Hey, what's up guys? And welcome back to another Reddit Stories video. You guys seem to keep loving these videos and keep asking for more and more. So let's do another Reddit video. So sit back, relax, and if you're new here, subscribe. It's the channel's goal to be at 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I think we can do it. So please subscribe. And alright, anyways, let's get into the first story. Strange encounter while hunting in rural Texas. True story. I was told you guys might like this here. This happened when I was growing up, around 2004, 2005, when I was about 13 years old. It took place in a rural area, a good ways outside the town of Uvalde, TX. The town itself was really small back then and not much to look at. It's just one of those towns that really isn't on the way to anywhere important. My father knew someone who owned a deer lease that was about 8 acres, I think, down outside of that area, and was complaining about a ton of hogs that were tearing up their land. Being open season on hogs in the South, my dad thought he would surprise me that summer and take me down for a week to go hunting for them. Not only did that help him with networking for his job, but also gave us some quality father/son time. I remember the drive down there from Dallas was torture. It was about 7 hours in my dad's hardtop Jeep Wrangler. That car was so uncomfy, I hated it. All I had to do was either stare out the window or try and beat Super Mario Land 2 on my Game Boy Pocket, something I was never able to accomplish in my youth, lol. The drive obviously took most of the day, so we got there in the early evening. The owner of the land had told my dad that he hadn't had anyone lease it that year yet, and the cabin and the property might be a little rough and dusty. I didn't really care. At this point in my life, I had been in Scouts for a couple years and spent a lot of my free time in the woods or fishing with friends. Needless to say, I was pretty comfortable roughing it. So after unlocking the gate and driving to the cabin on the land, we settled in. The cabin was pretty rough. Dust and dirt everywhere. Flies. I remember that it looked like some raccoons had gotten into the cabin and crapped on the floor. After cleaning up a bit and getting the sleeping bags out, then setting up the cots, we decided to sleep. Something about that night was weird. I never was able to get comfortable enough to fall asleep for any restful amount. I couldn't put my finger on why, but I had that feeling of being watched. I was finally able to drift off for what I guessed was an hour, maybe. When we woke up, it was early, about 7 a.m. We decided to scout around the land for tracks and signs of hogs and find a good place to set up a blind. It was the summer, and horribly hot in the afternoons, so morning was the best time to be out and about. After walking for an hour or so, we came to an area of trees, lightly dense, and luckily found some signs of hogs, typical torn-up ground where they had been rooting, so we followed them into the trees. I was looking for more signs when my dad stopped me with his arm. I remember looking up and seeing someone standing about 50 yards away. Some of their body was blocked by trees. This was private land, so they definitely weren't supposed to be there. We also had confirmation from the owner before we got to the lease that nobody was there, not to mention the gate was locked up when we first arrived. The person was wearing some bright-colored red jacket. We slowly walked toward them. My dad called out something like, "Hey, we're hunters. This is private land." The person didn't move at all, dead still. We were about 30 yards away and could see that he was turned away from us with his hands in his pockets. Weird thing was that the person was in a ski jacket and what looked to be ski pants. Now this is Texas in the summer. It was about 98 outside by then. My dad called out again, no reaction. He told me to stay behind him and unsnap the clip to his pistol holster. That's all we had at the cabin. Since we were only scouting the area, the rifles were back at the cabin. We approached the person's right side, and then my dad told me to stay put. About 20/8 away, I stayed and crouched down, watched him circle around to the front of the man, all the while talking to him, asking if he was okay. He finally passed around to the front of the man, and my dad stood straight up with a confused look on his face. I called out and said, "What's wrong?" And he called back saying, "It's a mannequin." I walked over to it while my dad stood there staring, and as I got closer, one thing stood out the most. The clothes it was wearing were brand new. No dust, sap, bird droppings, or signs of being outside for any more than day at most. At that moment, I looked at my dad and could see him get worried. Almost immediately after, I felt that feeling again, like we were being watched, and I knew my dad felt it too. I wanted to start crying. I remember feeling suddenly so scared. My dad whispered, "We're leaving right now." He grabbed my hand and drew his pistol. He scanned the area the whole way back while I was trying to hold back panicked tears. We got back as fast as we could. I was terrified, so it felt like an eternity, but in reality was only about 45 minutes max. I'm sorry that you've tried to go and remove some of his favorite pots of his friends from there last week. I know we didn't talk much on that day, and he was confused. I said that he'd camp out next week. When he was confused, he said that he would go check it out next week. When he was confused, he said that he would go check it out next week because his property was high-fenced. My dad normally isn't a paranoid person, but me being young and the lease possibly having someone there we didn't know about, he decided to be cautious and just get out of there. After we got back home, we talked, and my dad wasn't able to sleep the night before. As well, he had the same feeling, but didn't want to wake me up because he thought I was sleeping too. Turns out that next week he got a call from his buddy, and he checked the whole property and never found any trace of anyone, no mannequin or anything. That story still makes my hair stand on end. No idea what that was, but the paranoid man in me thinks it was some kind of trap or something. Not the creepiest thing that happened to me in the woods, but def top 3. So whoever was out there, I'm glad we never met. My encounter with a would-be axe murderer in the middle of the woods. So, to preface, I would like to state that this story is probably going to read like the plot of a campy 1980s horror movie and is going to be very long. However, this entire story is true, if not for being 5 miles from cell reception, and the way the story ends, there would be a police report for verification. I will be changing names, locations, and some details in order to protect the privacy of the innocent. A buddy of mine and I try to camp twice a month, now that I have a vehicle that can be trusted to get me to some of the more remote areas of our state. We planned a camping trip for this past weekend, 18 Feb 2022. Till 20th Feb 2022, we chose a fairly remote location. We had been to the previous weekend. The previous weekend, we were the only people we'd seen within 1 mile of our camp spot. Friday night, we got there and set up. This story takes place Saturday night. It's about 9 p.m., so the sun is long gone, and the moon hasn't quite risen yet. It's pitch black out, other than what our fire lights up. Suddenly, we hear a man screaming. We listen intently, silently sharing an anxious look. At first, we were hoping it was someone drunk and having a little too much fun, but it quickly becomes obvious this isn't fun party screaming. It isn't even like he's hurt. It sounds full of despair, anger, and anguish. I'm going to take a moment to remind you that this is at 9 p.m. pitch black night in the middle of nowhere woods 5 miles from the nearest cell phone signal. We hadn't seen anyone in hours. The screaming continues for what felt like hours, but was probably about 5 solid minutes. We had no idea what to make of it and started feeling extremely paranoid. We gathered up anything remotely close to a weapon and tried to come up with explanations of the screaming while keeping our eyes on the forest around us. After about 15 tense minutes of fear-induced paranoia, I nearly fell out of my seat as I watched a flashlight and lantern slowly enter our camp. I greeted the stranger with a basic, "How's it going?" before he was even lit up by the fire. He responded quickly but flatly by asking if we could do him a favor. "Depends on the favor," my buddy and I said in unison, obviously tense, holding our weapons close to us. The stranger proceeded to ask if he could hang out for a second, by the fire. Given the 2 of us and 1 of him, plus our myriad of weapons gathered from around camp to within our arm's reach, we decided to agree and let him hang out. After a short second of awkward silence, I ask him what the hell is going on. He proceeds to tell me and my buddy that he was camping down the trail with his buddy and that his buddy had snapped and tried to kill him. "Wait, what?" I said before the thought even finished processing in my head. "Is that the screaming we heard earlier?" The man slowly nods, staring blankly into the fire, and begins his story. "We were just hanging out, man. We came up earlier today and my buddy just freaked out. He started screaming and just wouldn't stop. Then he attacked me. He lunged at me and I told him to just back off and chill, you know? Well, he kept coming after me and it started getting pretty violent and I'm pretty sure he was going to kill me, so I grabbed my car keys, the lights, and ran. I don't know what to do, man. He chased me when I ran, and I don't know what to do. We don't have firearms or anything, but we do have a hatchet." My buddy and I look at each other for a second, completely astonished. Then something horrible dawned on me. Wait. He chased you like he's on his way here? Right now?" The man just slowly nods in reply. And right on cue, like some terrible horror movie come to life, we hear screaming from maybe 30, 40 miles away from our camp, down on the main trail. "I just want your fucking balance, Gary." "I want your balance, Gary." "Gary! Where are you? Where? Gary!" I'd never in my life heard a man scream like this. I'd never heard anything like it in my life. It was a brutal, guttural scream that was shrill to the ears, yet deep in pitch. The sound of someone gone completely mad. And the way he said the stranger's name would switch erratically from long and sing-songy to short, guttural punches of sound. We killed our lights, became silent, and listened. By some miracle, the madman didn't notice our camp and continued walking down the trail, screaming the whole way. We ended up chatting with who we'll call Gary for hours, listening to the screaming getting further and further. Come to find out, they had taken 4.55 grams of magic mushrooms each, and his buddy, who we'll call Ty, was a co-worker of his and was fine for 3.5 hours, then suddenly snapped. It seemed as though Ty thought he could kill Gary and steal his good trip. We hear the screams get further and further for over 2 hours. By this time, it's 11 p.m., the moon is starting to come out, and it's below 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Ty had no jacket or flashlight, according to Gary. My buddy and I are way too drunk to drive out of camp to get cell service as it was snowy and icy and required 2-3 miles of highway driving after getting off the trail, and Gary was still lightly feeling the effects of weed and mushrooms, so he couldn't drive either. We had to make the decision to let the guy wander, hope he sobered up and could find his way back. And he did. Oh, he did. Right into our camp. We hear yelling after about an hour of no screams, maybe 30-50, from camp again. Hey, help, please help me, I'm lost. We can tell the man's walking from the woods into our camp. We tell Gary to hide just in case and greet the man, with me carrying my 12-gauge shotgun and my .40 cal pistol holstered, my buddy carrying his AK-47 style rifle and his 2 9-meter Glocks holstered. And with our flashlights on our brightest settings in his face. He was about 6'2", 6'3", and approximately 300 pounds. We talked to him, decided he was calm enough to walk with, and walked him back to his camp. He seemed really remorseful, said he blacked out and didn't remember anything, and had a falling out with his buddy. We escorted him back to his camp down the trail, returned and told Gary that Ty seemed cool, and if anything else happened to scream and come running, we would come out and help him out. It ended up being a happy ending. We made friends with Gary, and I got his phone number to make sure the next day he got back into town safely, back to his wife and kid, and we're actually planning a camping trip with him soon. But Ty, who wandered screaming like a deranged maniac into the forest, potentially wielding a hatchet to murder your friend to steal his good trip or whatever it is your psychosis-filled mind was thinking, for the love of God, let's not meet again.
That's the end of the story. If you have hooked up till here, then hit like button and comment down your views. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet, then do support me by subscribing, so you may not miss any video in future.